Let's set the scene. It's December 2001, and it is brutally cold. We're in a remote, snow-covered forest in the country of Georgia, miles and miles from anywhere. The kind of cold that just gets right into your bones. And in this exact situation, three local men are just trying to find some way, anyway, to get warm. Their search would lead them to a discovery that was as horrifying as it was radioactive.
So these three men, they're out in this desolate landscape just trying to gather firewood. And as they're working, they stumble upon something weird. Something that is completely out of place in the middle of a frozen forest.
In a small circle on the forest floor, all the snow was just gone. The ground was actually wet and steaming. And right there, in the middle of this strange, warm patch of earth, were two heavy metal cylinders. Now, if you're freezing to death, what does this look like? It looks like a miracle, a source of heat right when you need it most. And right there, they made a decision that would change absolutely everything.
So, this discovery, it must have seemed like a gift, but what exactly did they find out there in the snow? And why was this strange, inviting warmth so catastrophically dangerous?
These are the objects they found. Each one weighed about 8 to 10 kilograms, so pretty heavy, and they were giving off this steady, almost inviting heat. The men thought, hey, perfect, portable heaters. Let's use them to stay warm tonight. It was a fatal mistake. What they'd really found were the cores of two abandoned Soviet-era power generators. These things are basically nuclear batteries, officially called radioisotope thermoelectric generators, or RTGs. They're designed to provide power for decades in super remote places with zero maintenance. And all that heat they produce, it comes from the intense radioactive decay of strontium-90.
Okay, now check out this diagram. It shows you how these things are built. See that little red square in the center, number 4? That's the intensely radioactive core. Now, normally, that core is supposed to be wrapped up in multiple, heavy layers of shielding, tungsten, lead, to keep all that radiation safely inside. But the ones these men found had been ripped apart by scavengers. The shielding was gone, leaving the radioactive core completely exposed.
And this is the most critical part of the whole story. For several hours, two of the men carried these raw, unshielded sources directly on their backs. To put this in perspective, from a meter away, each one was putting out a dose of about 1 sievert per hour. In direct contact, the dose rate was just astronomical. A person can get a lethal dose in just a few hours. These guys were exposed to them all night.
The consequences weren't something they had to wait for. The attack on their bodies began almost immediately, showing up as this invisible but incredibly violent sickness.
I mean, look at this. Within just 3 to 5 hours of finding the sources, all three men were violently ill. We're talking severe vomiting, headaches, dizziness. These are the terrifying, classic first signs of massive radiation exposure. The vomiting was apparently so intense, it just didn't stop for the entire night.
What they were suffering from has a name: acute radiation syndrome, or ARS. It's what happens when a massive dose of radiation hits your body all at once. It causes catastrophic damage to your internal organs, starting with the most sensitive cells, like the ones in your bone marrow and your digestive system. And this chart just illustrates the damage perfectly. This is for patient 1DN. By day 21, his white blood cell counts had completely bottomed out. His bone marrow, which is the factory for your entire immune system, had been totally destroyed. He was left with basically zero defense against any kind of infection. But the damage wasn't just internal. Where those sources had touched their backs, something else was happening: cutaneous radiation syndrome. The diagram on the left shows you the areas that were hit, and the photo on the right, well, that shows the horrific reality. It's a deep, non-healing radiation burn. This isn't like a burn from fire. It's a wound that's being created from the inside out. So, as the men are in the hospital fighting for their lives, a totally different battle was just beginning back in the mountains. It was a high-stakes hunt for the deadly orphan sources they'd left behind.
A team from the Georgian government, with help from the International Atomic Energy Agency, had to go back into that same forest to find and secure these things. And the conditions were just brutal. They were dealing with deep snow, a blizzard, and the road was blocked by a landslide. All of this while they were heading toward an invisible, deadly radiological hazard.
Get your head around this for a second. The two radioactive sources combined weighed less than 20 kilograms. But to transport them safely, the recovery team had to build and haul in this custom container made of 25 centimeters of solid lead that weighed 5.5 tons. That's the weight of an elephant, all just to shield the radiation from two small metal cylinders.
Yeah, retrieving these was not a simple pickup. It was a full-on radiological recovery mission with a super detailed plan. They built custom tools more than 2 meters long so they could handle the sources from a distance. The whole team trained on a mock-up of the site. And the most important rule of all, no single person could be near the sources for more than 2 minutes, period.
But even with all that planning, they ran into surprises. To avoid scaring the public, they covered the truck with a simple canvas tarp. But, as this diagram shows, that simple canvas cover actually reflected and scattered the radiation, creating a much bigger danger zone for the team as they were working to close that heavy lead container. It's a scary reminder of just how unpredictable radiation can be.
With the sources secured, the focus went back to the men. They had been transferred to specialized hospitals in Moscow and Paris, where doctors were now facing the monumental challenge of treating the devastating, long-term damage caused by the radiation.
This is an incredible and awful pairing of images. On the left, you have science. It's a dose map that scientists created of patient 2mg's back. It calculated that some areas got hit with over 19 gray of radiation. That's many times the lethal whole-body dose. On the right, you see the consequence. That's what that much energy does to human tissue, a massive, deep radiation ulcer that simply refuses to heal.
For patient 1DN, the fight was just long and agonizing. For almost 900 days, that's nearly 2.5 years, he fought. But the initial radiation damage just started a domino effect. The wound on his back got deeper, the radiation reached his bones and caused a severe infection, and in the end, his body just couldn't fight anymore. He passed away from septic shock and the failure of multiple organs.
The other patients went through grueling procedures too. They had numerous surgeries where doctors had to perform necrotectomies, which is surgically removing all the dead tissue, and then attempt these really complex skin grafts to cover the wounds. But radiation damage runs so deep, it destroys the blood vessels and tissue you need for healing, making recovery incredibly difficult, and in one case, just impossible.
So this whole tragic event, born from a simple search for warmth, holds some really critical lessons for us about the hidden dangers of our own past and the importance of working together.
So what's the takeaway here? Well, first, that so-called orphan sources, radioactive materials that have been lost or abandoned, are a deadly threat, just waiting to be found. The lack of a simple warning label turned a power source into a death trap. This accident also shows the limits of modern medicine when faced with this kind of extreme damage. And maybe most importantly, it highlights that securing every last piece of old radioactive material is a critical issue for global safety.
And that brings us to the final, chilling question. The official IAEA report on this accident states that a total of 8 of these RTGs were brought to Georgia in the 1980s. The 2 from the Lia accident were the 5th and 6th to be recovered, which means that somewhere out there, maybe lying in another forest or sitting in a scrapyard, 2 more of these deadly heat sources are still missing.